The vibration through the metal floor plates didn't come from the failing life support or the groaning hull of the mining rig. It was a rhythmic, violent thudding that crawled up Sora's spine, a sound from a world that had been dead for centuries. The music was a weapon, jagged and loud, shredding the oppressive quiet that had owned the station for weeks. Sora sat in the grid of the tech silo, her thermal regulation scales flushing a dull, empathetic copper as they tried to sync with the heat radiating from the human beside her. She had thrown her pulse rifle into the corner, like a piece of scrap. She didn't need it. There was nothing left to guard but a dying man and a stolen hour of noise. It turned out that protocols were easy to follow when the world made sense. Nay, but the crag had stopped making sense the moment the respiratory plague jumped from the ventilation shafts into the Xylari lungs. 6 hours ago, Sora had been a statue of rigid discipline. She stood at the high-security checkpoint of the restricted molecular synthesis lab, her visor polarized, her posture a warning. The silence of the lockdown was a predator, waiting for a cough or a stumble to signal another victim. Then came Jax. He didn't stop at the yellow safety line. He didn't offer the mandatory submissive tilt of the head. He kept walking until he was close enough for Sora to see the broken capillaries in his eyes and the smudge of grease on his jaw. He was violating every personal space mandate her species held dear, pressing into her perimeter with a blunt human desperation. "I need into the lab, Sora," he said. Akrun, his voice was a raspy friction. "The scrubbers in Sector 4 are redlining. If I don't balance the atmospheric mix, we're all breathing vacuum by morning." Sora's internal HUD flashed warnings. Biohazard alerts screamed in her ear. The AI-mandated lockdown was absolute. To open that door was to invite the plague into the one clean zone left. But she looked at the way his hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a frantic, exhausted kinetic energy. Truth is, she knew the scrubbers were fine. The station's sensors were green. Jax was lying, and he wasn't even doing a good job of it. Yet her hand moved. Her command-level biometric override hissed against the terminal. The seals groaned. The pressure equalized with a heavy sigh, and she let him through. Once inside, Jax didn't even glance at the repair consoles. He went straight for the molecular printer, his fingers flying across the interface to be past safety filters. He was hunting for unrefined toxins, the kind of caustic chemicals that usually required a dozen authorizations. A chemical cocktail brewed in the heart of a plague ship. The printer hummed, a low industrial moan that ended in a sharp chime. A flask slid out, filled with a glowing amber liquid that smelled like scorched earth and fermented grain. Sunburn. It was illegal Earth-style moonshine, a liquid fire that could strip the lining from a Xylari throat. Jax took a long, staggering swallow, his face contorting in a grimace that looked remarkably like a triumph. "We're leaving," he wheezed, wiping his mouth, "and we're taking the long way down." They moved through the arterial maintenance crawl spaces, the kind of places where the station's bones showed. Sora's scales shifted to a dull, frigid gray as the ambient temperature dropped. Above them, the red pulse of a security drone swept the corridor. In any other life, Sora would have signaled it. She would have reported the breach. Instead, she reached out and pulled Jax into the alcove, her hand pressing against the damp fabric of his jumpsuit. His heart was a frantic, uneven hammer against his ribs. She could feel it through her palm. It was the only thing on the station that still felt alive. Eventually, they reached the tech silo, a cavernous, vibrating hollow filled with ancient circuitry and the smell of hot grease. It was the station's basement, a place where the AI's eyes didn't bother to look. Jax fumbled with a panel, pulling out an ancient forbidden audio deck. It looked like a brick of matte black plastic, a relic from a time when humans still lived under a single sun. He slammed a button. The sound didn't just fill the room, it attacked it. Electric guitars wailed with a jagged, distorted hunger. A drum beat like a war drum, relentless and messy. It was the sound of a species that refused to go quietly. Sora looked at her pulse rifle. It was a masterpiece of Xylari engineering, sleek and cold. It represented everything she was supposed to be: orderly, efficient, silent. She let it slip from her fingers. The metal clattered against the floor, a tiny noise swallowed by the roar of the music. She sat in the dirt beside him. Jax was leaning his head back against a massive power conduit, the amber flask of sunburn gripped in one hand. He was shivering, his breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. Truth is, the plague had already claimed him. Sora could see the way his skin was graying, the way the light in his eyes was beginning to flicker. But he wasn't dying like the others, curled in a sterile med bay while the silence ate them whole. He was dying loudly. Sora leaned in, closing the gap between them. Her thermal regulation scales flared, shifting from that cold gray to a searing, desperate orange. She was breaking every law of the Xylari High Command for 1 hour of borrowed heat. The heat of his body was a small, fragile fire in the middle of a frozen grave. She pressed her shoulder against his, her scales seeking the warmth of his skin, matching the rhythm of his labored breathing. In fact, the station was still dying. The plague was still winning. But in the dark of the tech silo, the music was a shield. The humans' chaotic defiance had become her own. They huddled together in the shadows of the vibrating silo, a single point of noise and warmth in the center of the dark, quarantined rig. Jax's hand found hers, his grip weak but certain. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say that the music wasn't already screaming.